About this time last year, my wife Lucy and I went to India. Our son Ben was finishing teaching at an international college near Pune and invited us to come and have a once-in-a-lifetime visit. In this visit, we were often driven by Ben's friend Dilip. Dilip worked for the college in Mahindra as a driver, and towards the end of our stay, Dilip took us out into part of the city, and then bringing us back by an unusual route, he stopped, pulled over on the side of a street, and then led us up a flight of stairs to his sister's house. The door opened and we walked in, me last, and we entered a room that was about 12 feet by 12 feet, where Dilip's sister, her husband, and their 3 children lived. As I walked in last, she turned to face me. She placed her hands over her heart, swept them down and touched my feet, stood up and placed her hand on her heart again. The gesture took about 2 seconds. I was overwhelmed and unsure of how to reply, but by offering a kind of a prayer bow to her. But I absolutely knew without any doubt that I was welcomed and had no need of anxiety or shame. How is it that open-hearted hospitality, a warm welcome and assurance of absolute trust can be communicated without words and be knowable, to be utterly honest, just through a gesture? Sometimes with words, there are kind of crevices and cracks through which truth and lies and misunderstandings can all slip. But our 3 weeks in India were an exercise in being perhaps creatively lost in the slippage of language and the confusion of tongues. It wasn't just that we didn't speak Hindi. We didn't speak traffic. We didn't understand the color and what all those things symbolized and why there was such color and richness everywhere. The illogical traffic had a kind of logic of its own. There were apparent rules and the traffic flowed with much hooting. Plates of food were unfathomable except by taste. And hundreds of other patterns by which to navigate life, which we all know in whichever culture we're comfortable in, they were different. They were incomprehensible, foreign codes that we could not unravel. We were walking around the Tower of Babel with confused tongues. So what's all this got to do with Pentecost? I can hear you asking quietly in your minds. Pentecost and Pentecostals, I must say, have always left me a little bit ill at ease. Now, I did have a huge and significant life-changing moment of really being born again in the Spirit and a Pentecostal thing. Before I knew anything about it, I'd been brought up vaguely as an Anglican, so I didn't know about that stuff. We were sheltered from it. And there have been other Holy Spirit moments in my life, which I really treasure. But I've got to say, mostly, about 99.87% of my life doesn't really feel very caught up in the Holy Spirit. I don't have a sense of moving flames dancing around me or extra special music. I'm a bit dull, really. But that doesn't let me off the Holy Spirit hook. Because though the Holy Spirit may not be flowing over you like a waterfall, it doesn't mean that the Holy Spirit isn't kind of around in the background, asking you to look, to listen, to pay attention. It's in the ordinariness that you and I are called to pay attention to the Holy Spirit. I think the clue for making Pentecost a spiritual practice, a way of intentionally processing the experiences that come into your path and the life that you live with your friends, is to look at what life in the Spirit might actually be like. Going back to India, quite quickly on arriving in India, I realized that I could get very annoyed with India. I could choose to be. But the first step in having a spiritual practice is noticing things like, I am becoming very annoyed. Mostly we just get annoyed, but there's a knack to saying, aha, I am getting annoyed, and then deciding whether you want to get annoyed or not. You have a choice. When a feeling of irritation comes upon you, if you're awake and you're perceiving it, you can have a choice. You can get irritated, or you can choose not to. I chose not to. It would have been easy to get annoyed in India because there were 100 things that India didn't do right. Of course, right is the way we do it in Toronto today. That's right. Well, of course I think that's right. That's where I live. Living in India, everything was weird. But you know, that Tower of Babel, confusion of tongues, the wind rushing, the flames and tongues of fire, and people streaming out of a building and speaking in languages that other people could understand, and some people just thought they were drunk. You have to somehow make your way open to that, and to not just find it annoying or upsetting or weird, but to say, I want to pay attention to this. St. Paul, who often writes about being swept up in the Spirit, also writes about living in the Spirit. I think almost most of what St. Paul writes is actually about living in the Spirit, if you look at it. His famous hymn to love in 1 Corinthians 13, it writes like a piece that you can accurately, if you choose to, change some of the words around, and in place of the word love, you can put in God. God is patient. God is kind, never envious or boastful or rude. Or as in a good relationship, you could put in I. With you, I will be kind. With you, I will be patient. I will not be envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. I will not insist on my own way. I will not be irritable or resentful. I will not rejoice in wrongdoing. I will strive to rejoice in truth. In India, I decided that I would not get annoyed, but I would look to see what India sees. I would not judge, because my criteria of judgment simply didn't work in India. I would not be irritable, because it would be hurtful to the people I love and everybody else if I was always being irritable. I would delight in beauty. I would be amazed by the things that were new and accept every food and drink, experience or new place that came in front of me. I knew it would make me a lot more peaceful and be a lot more peaceful for my family. Coming back to Pentecost, which I seem to keep straying away from, but I'm not. One of the nice things about Pentecost, even though many people could understand what the disciples were saying, when you meet Pentecostals or people who speak in tongues, it actually feels like a lack of language. And certainly when I was in the middle of a marketplace full of people speaking Hindi, they might as well have been speaking in tongues. As far as I was concerned, I couldn't understand a word. But that Babel effect, where your brain, your understanding, your cleverness, all this stuff that we depend on all the time, simply doesn't work because you don't know what anybody's saying. It closes down critical thinking, and you have to function from another place. You have to function sort of from feeling, because you can't think your way through it. You have to kind of feel and guess your way through. With your analytical brain on vacation, your heart has a chance to listen, your eyes to look. To be greeted by Dilip's sister touched my heart because there were no words that I could comprehend. I had to go by heart as I responded to her. In the chaos of the city traffic, I saw that no one ever got angry the way they do in Toronto, or offensive the way they do in Toronto. But people gave way. I watched 5 lanes of traffic going round a roundabout and 1 car going the wrong way. Nobody got upset. It flowed magically, organically, if not obediently. And there was a beauty and a dance to the way crowds moved as well as traffic. And my heart saw the dance and the politeness of it. Lost on street corners, as Lucy and I often were, I learned to look at the faces of the people who just appeared to direct helpless, lost foreigners. We had just about enough ability to name our destination, and by many hand gestures and pointings and countings with fingers, we were able to find our way. But what I really saw and what I remember is not the directions, but the kindness, help freely given to us in our weakness, in our deafness and dumbness, and the gestures of goodness that came to us again and again and again. Perhaps speaking in tongues at Pentecost is the abandonment of words of judgment and criticism and self-protecting narratives. It's letting go of cultural norms and stepping away from our fast-held certainties. It's about looking and listening and finding the ways of love. Jesus once said, "Unless you become like little children, you cannot see the kingdom of heaven." Children are better at love than critical analysis. They are better at hugs than lectures. Looking into people's faces in India as we stumbled, mute, deaf, and half-blind to the rules of interactions, I saw more kindness, more love, more peace of heart and mind, more generosity of spirit and openness to strangers than I could ever have imagined. Jesus in John's story, towards the end, says, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. Peace I leave with you. My own peace I give you." The language which unites all of God's people is not a spoken language. It's a peace which is given, in which you can choose to live. It is a heart which has put down being troubled and focusing on trouble. It is a heart which has chosen to be unafraid. It is a soul that asks the Spirit to live there, and slowly, over decades, to teach you everything and to remind you of the God you saw in Jesus the Christ. There's no language for this. There's no written text. It's etched into the smile lines of weathered faces and passed in a handshake or in a bowl of soup or a sandwich. It can only be received by those who will put away their collected strengths to make room for the love of others to hold you. So this Pentecost, I wish you the confusion of language, the confusion of Babel, the unknown tongues of the Holy Spirit, which can lead you through weakness and trust into the deep peace of Christ. Happy Pentecost.